Joining us now, White House editor for Politico, Sam Stein, and presidential historian and Rogers Chair in the American presidency at the Vanderbilt University, Jon Meacham. He is an unofficial advisor to President Joe Biden. Good to see you both, guys. Sam, let me just get into the nuts and bolts with this quickly with you. Is Kyrsten Sinema, the senator from Arizona, going to be the holdout? Is she really going to stand in the way of President Biden getting this sweeping package through and advancing it through the Senate?
I would be surprised, honestly. There's so much in this package, so much emotional commitment from everyone else in the party to this package, even in its pared down state, that she would really be risking her career as a Democrat if she were to vote against it. Now, that doesn't mean that she doesn't ask for and get the carried interest loophole taken out. It's a $14 billion revenue raiser, which is a lot, obviously, but compared to the corporate minimum tax is relatively small. She could get that taken out. I actually think the bigger hurdle, putting aside whether or not a lawmaker comes down with COVID, that's a hurdle. But I do think in the House, you might have a little bit of a hurdle with some lawmakers who are more favorably disposed to the pharmaceutical industry, who do not like the real crux of this provision, which is allowing Medicare to purchase prescription drug prices. All of which is to say that everyone's optimistic cautiously among Democrats right now, but they also acknowledge there's like at least 10 or 12 dramatic turns left here before anything gets to President Biden's desk, if it does at all.
Jon Meacham, one of the things that's been interesting about this is the extent to which almost no one, including, by the way, members of the Democratic caucus, senators, didn't know this was going on, that this was negotiated sort of in the quiet between the White House, of course, was aware of it, between Chuck Schumer and Joe Manchin, something we don't see a lot of in Washington, where every detail and every twist and turn is broadcast on Twitter and cable news. What do you make of this bill and the way it's come to pass?
Well, I think that what Twitter and cable news and the observable world can follow is obviously part of the story. And one of the things that people like me think about is the disconnect between headlines and history. What it is that we remember administrations for, what we remember Congresses for, what we remember generations for, and what it felt like when they were dealing with this day to day, hour to hour. And I think, if anything, this July news, I think, should remind us that for all of our certitude, for all of our hyperbole, and I'm guilty as anybody. So this is a sermon from a sinner, not a saint, which is good, given my basic orientation. Everybody needs to remember, it seems to me, that in a democracy, politics is inherently complicated. If it were easy, if democracy were easy, everybody would do it, right? So this is really complicated. This is a big, complex, disputatious country. And the founders set this up so that our factions would contend with each other, not necessarily arriving at a grand solution every 20 minutes or so. But I really think, to me, the takeaway from all of this is, obituaries that are written about political careers and Congresses and this vote and that vote, sometimes they're true. Mark Twain once said, the rumors of my death are greatly exaggerated, but then Mark Twain did die. That is true. Eventually he did. But in this particular moment, I think that we need to remember that we have a president of the United States. He's my friend, so take this for what it's worth, who is really trying hard to govern a country that hasn't been this divided since the 1850s. And so it may not fit into a tweet. It may not fit into a segment, but we have to judge our leaders and ourselves, it seems to me, on what we managed to do over a couple of years, over a generation.
Jon Meacham, with the stunning fact of the morning there, Mark Twain did die.
Yes.
Sam, thank you for that, John. Sam, I took at the end of what you were saying your little note of caution about if this ever does get to the president's desk. Let's play optimist because, hey, we're in Washington, and if you don't play optimist, you're probably going to shoot yourself tomorrow. So let's play optimist and say that this does get to the president's desk. Play this out in terms of the midterm elections. Is November just too far away? Is inflation just too much of a big problem? How much impact could this make for the Democrats come the midterms?
Well, first of all, don't book me against Meacham. He's too philosophical. He's too global. He makes me seem full.
And he has great facts about Mark Twain.
Yeah, I will say this, though.
Well,
he's wrong about if you can't govern in a tweet, the simple solution is just thread your tweets, right? So he's wrong about that. But in terms of your question, does this play out and how does it play out in November? It's impossible to know, right? I mean, yes, they could pass something. There could be a swell of optimism. But at the same time, we could get, inflation numbers that are horrific. People who, normally vote may feel like this doesn't impact them enough to get them to the polls. I spent the week actually talking to people about their current economic lot, just because I wanted to know how they observed all these big numbers that were coming in, whether it was GDP or inflation. And the truth of the matter is that a lot of people just aren't paying as close attention as we do. And what they pay attention to, I know this is a little bit of a cliche, but what they really do pay attention to is the price of the gallon of milk and whether they need to buy two because it's on sale and it's cheaper. And so, yes, I think this does give Biden, if it were to pass, a lot of momentum. He would have a credible case to make that he's had one of the most consequential first terms in office in recent memory, if all goes according to plan. But I don't know if that's enough to change historical tides or the sense of doom that has kind of come over this country and despair about the state of the economy itself.
So, John Meacham, as we mentioned, you're sort of an unofficial advisor to President Biden. What is the sense in the White House, and what's your sense, actually, of why President Biden sits where he does in the polls, in the 30s in just about every poll in terms of an approval? Inflation is off the charts. We understand that. It feels like an uncertain time, but unemployment is low. There are other things that would be theoretically working in his favor. What is it about this moment that has his numbers so low?
Well, let me just speak for myself because I have lots of thoughts on this. So this is just me. I think that structurally it's going to be really hard in the current polarized climate for a president to be above 50% for a long time, absent an overwhelming national crisis. And even with that caveat, it's hard to necessarily see that. One of my favorite historical details is to tell you how much the country has changed in the last 60 or 70 years. Something like 40% of Democrats voted for Dwight Eisenhower. Something like 40% of Democrats voted for Richard Nixon in 1972. Didn't just say, oh, I think he's doing a good job. They went and they voted for him. And that sort of crossover, it just doesn't exist anymore for all sorts of reasons. Look, this is inflation. I don't think there's much, it's not very complicated, right? And there are Western leaders across the world who are suffering this. And so sometimes you get to control events and sometimes events control you. That's the nature of reality, right? That's what you do when you go into the arena. And so my other point about this is presidential politics doesn't exist in a vacuum. Right. So Sam can check me on this. It's not as though anybody went to the country in 2016 and said, do you want Donald Trump to be president? That wasn't the question. The question was, do you want Secretary Clinton or do you want Donald Trump? And for all lots of complicated factors, including James Comey that you just mentioned a moment ago, Trump prevailed. The question in 2020 wasn't, do you want Joe Biden to be president? It was, do you want Joe Biden or do you want 4 more years of Donald Trump? And then, in this curious American way, we tend to immediately consign the other person to oblivion psychologically, and so we tend not to remember that. And so I would just urge people, I try to do it, is when you're judging the performance of your senator, your congressperson, your president, it's not just a referendum. It's also a choice. because it's not as though there's an Avengers Marvel superhero who is out there, and if only we'd give them the power, all would be well. These are human beings. They're trying. And I think that you have to find a way to see this as a comparison and not as a referendum.
Yeah. Which is why in all these polls we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, where even Democrats, 70% of them say, I want somebody else to run in my own party. Then if you ask, what about a head-to-head between Biden and Trump, 95% of them say, well, of course I would vote for Joe Biden in that case. Jon Meacham, Sam Stein, as Sam said, a real mismatch here. But, Sam, you held your own. You did what you could here. And you gave it a try. Nice job, buddy.
Thank you.
Guys, thanks. Have a good weekend. We'll see you. It was